We are the Ministry of the Real Truth, and via this video we are bringing you the book Nailed, 10 Christian Myths that show Jesus never existed at all, by atheist author David Fitzgerald, who appeared on the YouTube video Mythicism podcast, and we placed comments underneath that video and got a great response from what we believe to be an atheist that was trying to do his damnedest to debunk us, to put something over us. But we have sources, etc., and defeated that particular commentator with the sources, links to the sources, evidence, etc., that Christ indeed actually existed, that he did exist, that the 12 disciples existed through the original ancient Old Testament Tav Asheret, Nishana Articus of Prayer, the sacred scribal language of God that he spoke to Adam and Eve with in the Garden of Eden, etc., and the Galilean Aramaic, the original ancient, very old Galilean Aramaic manuscripts, texts, which were translated into the nearest English equivalent by native-born Aramaic-speaking translator from Mesopotamia, Syria, Victor Nimrod Alexander. We did try to open this full screen, but it was like this book was nailed shut, so we had to do it in a smaller size. So we're going to look at this book by David Fitzgerald to see what he has to say. And there's praise for this particular book by different people, especially atheist Richard C. Carrier, Robert M. Price, who Mythvision had a problem with, Bob Price, parts of this book previously appeared in the online essay 10 Beautiful Lies About Jesus, which took honourable mention for the 2010 Mythicist prize offered by the Mythicist Forum, a consortium of secular New Testament scholars. The information in that essay has been updated and corrected where necessary for this book. So it's probably some sort of atheistic anti-myth organisation. We don't know. We can't verify that. We'd have to do some research on that particular consortium of secular New Testament scholars to verify that. For everyone who ever thought to themselves, I wonder what Jesus was really like. And contest page. And people's reaction. Facts are sometimes the most radical critics of all. Theologian Wilhelm Reda. Myth number 1. The idea that Jesus was a myth is ridiculous. In matters of religion, it is very easy to deceive a man and very hard to undeceive him. Pierre Bayle. Didn't there have to have been a Jesus? Most people have never heard of the ancient Greek mythographer Homerus, who first theorized that the gods of mythology were deified human beings. Well, yes, the Romans were deified human beings. There was a decree or law put out by the Roman Senate saying to these particular Caesars, Augustus Caesar, etc., Tiberius was one of them, the adopted son of Caesar Augustus, that they were sons of God, a son of God, They were gods, descended from the gods, etc. And these Caesars lapped it up. And then images were put in place all over Rome, villages, etc., where people had to worship that image of that Caesar, that reigning Caesar. So most people have never heard of the ancient Greek mythographer Homerus, who first theorized that the gods of mythology were deified human beings, and their myths based on legends sprung from accounts of real people and events. So many might be surprised to find that they are humorists on the subject of Jesus. That is to say, though they may not believe Jesus was the divine Christ that Christianity venerates as the Son of God and Saviour of the world, and may regard accounts of the miracles and wonders attending him as mere legendary accretion, nevertheless they certainly believe there had to have been a central figure that began Christianity. Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet, or a magician, as you see on one of those films. He says, "Magician, go away," when he made the pigs run and go off the cliff because he sent demons from this demoniac that they came across in a graveyard when they landed on a particular island. You know, and he says, "I am legion, for we are many," etc., etc. Perhaps he was just a wandering teacher or an exorcist, an apocalyptic prophet or a zealot who opposed the Romans. Perhaps he was all these things, or even a composite of several such early 1st century figures. But at any rate, surely there had to be somebody at the original core of Christianity, arguably the most famous individual in human history. Was it C.S. Lewis that said Jesus was either the real deal, he was real, or he was a lunatic, or a complete liar? Which one was he? All this seems to be a perfectly reasonable, completely natural assumption to make. So why would anyone be so foolish as to propose that Jesus never existed? Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we are unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no, the opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity, while he hasn't come across the original ancient, very old Galilean Aramaic manuscripts hidden and preserved by the original ancient Church of the East, founded by Thomas. These texts that were supposedly what they heard, witnessed the Christ do during his 3 to 3.5 years of ministry, because they are around him for 24/7, 365. And they state in the scriptures, "We're not liars, why would we lie? Because then our testimony would be invalid, God forbid," etc., etc. So they as testators or testifiers verified and went to their deaths gladly because they believed in Jesus the Christ, because they were witnesses. They were right there 24/7, 365, and they heard what he said. He basically taught them. They were his disciples and so forth, and someone wrote all that he did and said down. Okay, and when this church was founded by Thomas, Thomas handed those texts over to the high priest appointed of that church, because there was a church, i.e. a house, a place where everybody gathered, a congregation, an assembly, in a house, i.e. a church, not necessarily a building with a steeple and organ player and so forth. But God destroyed it, according to the commentator, who can't remember his name now. It's in another video in regards to this nailed claim. This podcast with that guy Myth Vision and this David Fitzgerald. we've forgotten that guy's name already. But anyway, we can include that video underneath this as evidence. It's featured in that particular video. Doesn't it just make more sense to assume that there was a historical Jesus, even if we are unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? As it turns out, no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at the evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find. Well, that's all that rubbish. We've just proven that. And the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity or came before Christianity. Yeah, okay. There seems to be an influence of their stories, the biblical stories, their writings, even the Jewish Old Testament stories, etc., in the Hebrew Bible, the Judaism, etc., that come from the ancient Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian myths of old, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the story of the flood, creation, etc. So, but there is this solid evidence that the Christ indeed existed because of these original, ancient, very old Galilean Aramaic manuscripts in the Old Testament Tav Asheret, Shana Atika, Cypriea, or Aramaic Old Testament manuscripts that speak of him from the very first verse in Brita, which is Aramaic for Genesis in English. So, as he stated, the whole Bible speaks about him, Jesus the Christ. Okay, so again, doesn't it make more sense to assume that there's a historical Jesus, even if we are unable to recover the real facts about his life and death? And it turns out no. The opposite is true. The closer we look at evidence for Jesus, the less solid evidence we find, and the more we find suspicious silences and curious resemblances to the pagan and Jewish religious ideals or ideas and philosophies that preceded Christianity or came before. And once you begin to pass out the origins of this, tradition or that teaching from the various sources, the sweater begins unraveling quickly until it becomes very difficult to buy that there ever was, or even could have been, any historical figure at the centre. So, Bart de Ehrman's statement in his Misquoting Jesus seminar, this debate, that he believed that, yes, Jesus did, he doesn't believe in God, but he did believe that Jesus did exist, but maybe not the Jesus that Christians push today. And give me Jesus. Give me all I want. Thanks, Jesus. I want money. I plant a seed. The church say so. And I'll get a harvest. I'll get all this money. Money. And God becomes their money, right? Oh, sorry. Money becomes their God. 10 beautiful lies about Jesus. Yeah, okay. God becomes their money. Money becomes their God. The beautiful lies about Jesus. Christianity, like all religious movements, was born from myth-making. And nowhere in this is this clearer than when we examine the context from which Jesus sprang. This is his perspective, right? The supposed historical underpinning of Jesus, which apologists insist differentiates the Christ from the myriad other saviour gods and divine sons of the ancient pagan world, simply does not hold up to investigation. What it actually does through those ancient Aramaic, OT, and New Testament Galilean Aramaic manuscripts. On the contrary, the closer we examine the official story, or rather stories of Christianity or Christianities, the quicker it becomes apparent that the figure of the historical Jesus has travelled with a bodyguard of widely accepted, seldom examined untruths for over 2 millennia. Yet people have gone in there and changed it. Men have rewritten it, reconstructed it, made modern versions of it, and played around with it. They've really done a work on it. The purpose of this all too brief examination is to shed light on 10 of these beloved Christian myths. 10 beautiful lies about Jesus. 1. The idea that Jesus was a myth is ridiculous. True. 2. Jesus was widely famous, but there was no reason for contemporary historians to notice him. He was well known by the peoples, etc., and those in authority, and there was a reason to notice him. the historians, the scribes, etc. of those days, because he exposed the Pharisees, and they didn't like that because they liked their authority, their power that they had. They liked to be noticed. They were pompous, etc., etc. They were pretending to be all holy, following the Mosaic law, etc., etc. They sat at the best feasts, were first to the best food, etc., etc. Trumpets were blown when they walked down the street. That's how pompous they were. 3. Ancient historian Josephus wrote about Jesus. Yeah, well, apparently he's not that reliable, because they reckon maybe some other person added to it. There's a different style between Josephus and the other writer. That there might be another writer involved, adding his 2 cents worth, right? Trying to emulate that style of Josephus, but according to Bart the Erman, etc., they noticed that, hey, it's a different style, so it can't be him, etc., etc. So they deem him unreliable. Or those Josephus records or books, information unreliable. Eyewitnesses wrote the Gospels. Maybe not. There were a lot of people around that wanted to write in the style of Paul, etc. They can't use the name Bernard or Harry, so they try to get popularity by writing in the style of Paul. But Paul had key elements that he knew that there was a lot of letters floating around in his day that he never wrote. They're pseudepigrapha, they are fake, etc. like that. He was well aware of that. He writes about that. So he used a certain lines of text to indicate to people, this is me, your brother Paul. This is evidence that I am the one writing these letters, like Bart the Erman stated. There's 13 letters of Paul, and apparently 6 or 7 of them were genuine letters of Paul. The other 6 or 7 weren't. There was somebody else writing in his style. Yeah, we say 6 or 7 because it could be 6 that are authentic, or 7 that are authentic, or 6 that aren't, or 7 that aren't. Okay, we just to remember that sort of thing at the top of our head. Okay, but it definitely is something that Bart Ehrman stated. Who says there's no Jesus? We've already begun. Our first Christian myth is the knee-jerk dismissal of the idea that Jesus may have only been a figure of legend. Unsurprisingly, apologists take umbrage at the very notion and declare that historians have always overwhelmingly agreed that Jesus was real. Campus Crusade for Christ minister Josh McDowell gives prime examples of these sorts of dismissive pronouncements in his book, The New Evidence, that demands a verdict, page 120. No serious scholar has ventured to postulate the non-historicity of Jesus. I have bets. What do we know about Jesus? Some writers may toy with the fancy of a Christ myth, but they do not do so on the ground of historical evidence. The historicity of Christ is as axiomatic for an unbiased historian as the historicity of Julius Caesar. It is not historians who propagate the Christ myth theories. F.F. Bruce, the New Testament documents, are they reliable? It's true enough that the majority of biblical historians do not question the historicity of Jesus, but then again the majority of biblical historians have always been Christian preachers. So what else could we expect them to say? So you have people like Bart the Ehrman, who's not a Christian, he's an agnostic atheist, admittedly, yet he quotes biblical scripture as a quote historian, unquote, a biblical historian. So what else could we expect them to say? For all their bluster, the truth is that for as long as there have been Christian writings, there have been critics who have disputed Christian claims and called events from the gospel stories into question. What's that verse? that Christ apparently said, it's not for those who are unspiritual and not of God, etc. So to them it's foolishness. Doesn't make any sense. That's how God's designed it. Or created it, designed it. 4. The plus of the truth is that for as long as there have been Christian writings, there have been critics who have disputed Christian claims and called events from the gospel stories into question. And since at least the 18th century, a growing number of historians have raised serious problems that cast Jesus' historicity into outright doubt, as we'll see. Well, here's the problem. They're assuming. They're saying, well, we think or we believe. They're not saying directly, we know for a fact. Here's the established facts. Here's the evidence that's proven self-evident. Here's the proof of the writers, the authors' irrefutability or infallibility, right? Or how do we put that? That they are irrefutable, that they are infallible. Okay, they're not saying that. Jesus versus Julius Caesar. For instance, historian Richard Carrier, who's also an atheist, has pointed out the problems with Christian apologist Douglas Gibett's claims that the evidence for Jesus' resurrection meets the higher standards of historical inquiry, and is as certain as Julius Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BCE. Carrier notes, well, it is common in Christian apologetics throughout history to make absurdly exaggerated claims, and this is no exception. Then he compares the evidence for both events. First of all, we have Caesar's own account. In contrast, we have nothing written by Jesus, and we do not know who really wrote any of the Gospels. Well, supposedly you had the letter sent to, or maybe it's just, that's available, to King Akbar. Yeah, so he never actually wrote anything down. Yeah, okay. Give me that one. First of all, we have Caesar's own account. In contrast, we have nothing written by Jesus at this moment, and we do not know who really wrote any of the Gospels. Well, you actually do, if they were the 12 disciples that were there around him 24/7, 365, during his 3 to 3.5 year ministry, as witnesses to what he said, what he saw, what they saw him do, miracle-wise, etc., and then handed these texts over to the original ancient apostolic church of the East high priests, who hid them for 2,000 years from Emperor Constantine, the Roman Catholic Church, and so forth. First of all, we have Caesar's own account. In contrast, we have nothing written by Jesus, and we do not know who really wrote any of the Gospels. We just verified that. Second, many of Caesar's enemies reported the crossing of the Rubicon, but we have no hostile, even neutral records of the resurrection until over 100 years after the supposed event, 50 years after Christian beliefs had become widely known. Third, there are numerous, well, that should be wordily known, right? Third, there are numerous inscriptions, coins, mentions of battles, conscriptions, and judgments, which form an almost continuous chain of evidence for Caesar's entire march, but there is no physical evidence of any kind in the case of Jesus. Well, we actually just blown that away with those original ancient Galilean Aramaic manuscripts, hidden and preserved for over 2,000 years by the original Apostolic Orthodox Church of the East, founded by the disciple Thomas. There's plenty of Assyrian patriarchates, priests, bishops, Assyrian historians, both from the East and European, that verify that Christ actually existed. Right? Fourth, almost every historian of the period reports the Rubicon crossing, including the most prominent of the Roman age, Suetonius, Appian, Cassius Dio, and Plutarch. Moreover, these scholars have shown proven reliability, since a great many of their reports on other matters have been confirmed with material evidence and other sources. Well, we'll look into that, right? In addition, they all quote and name many different sources, showing a wide reading of the witnesses and documents, and they consistently show a desire to critically examine claims for which there is any dispute. If that wasn't enough, all of them cite or quote sources written by witnesses, hostile and friendly, of the Rubicon crossing and its repercussions. So that's in regard to Julius Caesar crossing over the Rubicon in 49 BCE. It's a different box of candy, right? it doesn't relate to Jesus the Christ. It's just that, obviously, by the sounds of it, they didn't mention him. Okay. But not a single historian mentions the resurrection until the 3rd or 4th centuries, and then only Christian historians. Okay, you've got the Western theology, the Western terminology, which these Western scholars, theologians, evangelists, Christians, etc., favour, rather than the original Eastern theology, terminology, etc., because they want their particular theology to be the one. Okay, so completely ignore their Eastern theology, their Eastern terminology, and in the favour of theirs. Okay, so they say things like, oh, no one spoke Aramaic or Hebrew. It was all Greek. All the disciples were Greek. Jesus was Greek. God was Greek. God was black. Jesus was black. All the disciples were black. All this sort of crap.